A black high school senior walks into the principal's office. Straight A student, college acceptance in hand, only to find police waiting for him. His crime? Looking like someone on camera. He pleads, shows his ID, but they still cuff him in front of the entire school. The footage goes viral, but what the body cam didn't catch is what tears the internet apart. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The lecture hall buzzed with the low hum of idle chatter, and the occasional flick of notebook pages. It was the kind of room that carried its own hierarchy. Rows filled with confident preppy students from legacy families, each seated like they'd already inherited the world. The large whiteboard stretched across the front wall like a blank battlefield. The air smelled faintly of dry erase markers, coffee and something unspoken. In the third row near the edge, never quite in the middle, never fully invisible, sat Tariq Ellis, his notebook open, filled with not just notes but tiny fractals and unsolved number patterns he sketched whenever the lecture turned predictable. His hoodie was plain, his laptop had no stickers, his face was calm, but his fingers tapped out a silent rhythm on the table. 4 beats, pause, 4 beats again. It was the second week of his freshman year at Braxton University, a school that prided itself on diversity in brochures, but still kept its black students on the outskirts of inclusion. Tariq wasn't there for attention. He'd come to disappear into numbers, not into the expectations or the condescension that always followed him around. But that morning, something felt off. Professor Whitaker, a man with sharp glasses and an even sharper condescension, clicked the remote and changed the slide. On the board appeared an equation so dense it looked like a chalk-stained mountain. A multi-layered proof involving Riemann zeta functions, tensor matrices, and an unsolved variation of the Navier-Stokes equation. It wasn't on the syllabus. No one had seen it before. Let's test the room, Whitaker said, smiling just a little too wide. This one's for fun. Just to stretch your minds. Anyone want to try it? The room collectively leaned back. Students avoided eye contact. Even the graduate assistants quietly scoffed under their breath. Everyone knew this wasn't a stretch problem. It was a public execution waiting to happen. Then the professor's gaze scanned the room like radar. It stopped, as if pre-programmed. Mr. Ellis, Whitaker said, folding his arms, why don't you come up and give it a try? Tariq didn't move. He looked up, slowly, scanning the professor's face for any hint of irony, any sign that maybe this was some twisted compliment. But there was nothing there, just that dry, expectant stare. The room shifted. Someone near the back whispered, "Oh, here we go." A girl on the right side, wearing Greek letters on her sweatshirt, stifled a laugh. A tall guy in the front leaned back, half smirking, arms crossed like he'd just been handed popcorn. Tariq's fingers stopped tapping. He glanced at the equation again, but he wasn't intimidated by it. Not even close. He'd seen similar problems before, ones buried in research journals, hidden in forums where anonymous geniuses debated for days. He understood the structure. He even had ideas. But that wasn't the issue. He knew why he was being called. It wasn't random. It never was. The only black face in a sea of white students, handpicked by a professor who hadn't spoken his name once during roll call until now. A setup, not to see brilliance, but to confirm bias, to humiliate, to remind the room of an old, quiet belief. They let him in, but he doesn't belong. The silence thickened. Is there a problem, Mr. Ellis? Whitaker asked, feigning confusion. No, sir, Tariq said. His voice was even, soft but not weak. He stood, closed his notebook carefully, and walked down the aisle. Every step echoed louder than the last. When he reached the whiteboard, he didn't pick up the marker right away. He just stood there, staring at the problem, as if he were reading a confession written in code. Behind him, the whispers started again. That he doesn't even know where to start. Why would you call him? He should just sit down before he embarrasses himself. Tariq heard all of it. Not in detail, but in frequency. The tone was enough. They didn't even try to hide it. But he didn't turn around. Instead, he reached into his back pocket and pulled out something unusual. A crumpled napkin. Professor Whitaker raised an eyebrow. Planning to eat your way through the proof? A few students laughed. It was polite racism, sanitized for academia. But Tariq ignored it. The napkin had symbols drawn on it. Dense, elegant, interconnected. They weren't solutions to this problem exactly, but fragments of a larger idea he'd been working on for months. A new way to approach chaotic systems. Something no one had read. No one had validated. Something he never showed anyone. Not even online. He didn't need approval to know it worked. Tariq stared at the board. The problem was clearly meant to break someone. An amalgamation of everything terrifying about calculus, linear algebra, and fluid dynamics, rolled into one visual threat. But he saw something different. He saw rhythm. A subtle loop in the equation, like a song trying to escape a broken record. He picked up the chalk, not the marker, the old-school dusty white chalk tucked behind the ledge, rarely used, always available. And then something shifted in the room. The sound of chalk tapping the board silenced everything. Tariq didn't start with the first line of the equation. He moved to the far right of the board and wrote a small symbol, something that looked more like a music note than a variable. Then he circled it. Then he moved left. He began breaking the equation into pieces, rewriting it in reverse. Not solving, but translating. Instead of numbers, he was reading movement. Instead of functions, he was mapping flow. The class sat stunned. This wasn't the way they were taught. He moved quickly, not because he was rushing, but because the answer was already in his mind. He was just documenting what he already knew. A few students leaned forward. Even the TA, who'd been texting under the desk, raised his head. Whitaker's smile had vanished. Minute by minute, the board filled up, not with one straight answer, but with multiple pathways layered over each other, showing options. Not a solution, but a system. Tariq underlined a final segment and stepped back. He didn't look at the class. He looked at the chalk in his hand, then quietly placed it back in its slot. A full 60 seconds passed before anyone spoke. Then, Whitaker cleared his throat. Interesting method, he said, though it doesn't resemble standard technique. I'll have to evaluate its validity. But the silence from the students told a different story. They'd seen something rare, something they didn't understand but couldn't dismiss. Tariq turned and walked back to his seat. And just as he sat down, the TA, still staring at the board, whispered under his breath, "Did he just invent that?" The class began to stir. For the first time, eyes weren't rolling or mocking. They were uncertain, curious, threatened. And Whitaker? He looked at the board again, but this time, with his jaw slightly clenched, because deep down he knew. This wasn't supposed to happen. Tariq wasn't supposed to win. As the class began to pack up, Tariq reached into his bag and pulled out another napkin, this one with something scrawled in red ink, a note he hadn't shown anyone yet. He stared at it, heart pounding. The napkin read, "Prove them wrong, but do it quietly." It wasn't his handwriting. And it wasn't the only one. There were 3 more, each hidden in different places, each signed with the same strange initials. The napkin weighed heavy in Tariq's pocket as he left the lecture hall, each step down the marble stairs echoing louder than the last. But in his mind, he wasn't hearing footsteps, he was hearing numbers. Familiar rhythms, half-remembered theorems, and the warm voice of his father reciting equations like bedtime stories. Back in Southside Chicago, the sound of brilliance didn't come from applause or accolades. It came from a mop bucket sloshing down linoleum school hallways. At midnight, his father, Malcolm Ellis, worked the night shift at Brighton Elementary. Janitor, floor technician, custodian. The titles didn't matter. What did matter was what happened when the keys stopped jingling and the halls emptied out. When Malcolm would pull an old math textbook from his locker and begin reading to his son like he was decoding sacred scripture. "Math ain't just numbers, kid," Malcolm used to say. "It's how the world breathes when no one's looking." Tariq was 6 when he started solving algebra problems backwards. 9 when he cracked a calculus identity his father had struggled with for weeks. By 10 he was sketching graphs with chalk on the cracked sidewalk while neighborhood kids played basketball nearby. They called him Professor Weird. Not with affection. He never quite belonged. Not with the kids in his block who thought he was trying to be white. And certainly not with the teachers at school who assumed he was cheating when he aced tests without trying. One time in 5th grade, a teacher called his father in for a parent conference. Not to praise Tariq, but to accuse him of plagiarizing a math contest answer. Malcolm didn't say a word until the teacher asked, "Do you even check your son's homework?" That night, Malcolm said nothing as they walked home in the freezing wind. But when they got inside, he took out a fresh notebook, handed it to Tariq and said, "From now on, write your own theorems." And Tariq did. Page after page, theory after theory. He built a world in his notebooks that no one else could see, an internal universe. Safe, infinite, his escape. They lived in a two-bedroom apartment above a laundromat, walls thin enough to hear every argument next door. But Malcolm had insulated their space with books, math books, philosophy, physics, even music theory. On nights when they couldn't afford heat, they bundled under blankets and read proofs aloud just to stay awake. Tariq still remembered how his father's eyes would light up when he solved a problem neither of them had cracked the night before. "You don't get it," Malcolm whispered once, his voice almost breaking. "You're gonna do what I couldn't." Malcolm had dreams once too. He'd been accepted into a doctoral program in applied mathematics in the early 90s. But back then, being brilliant and black in academia was like being invisible in plain sight. Accused of data manipulation without evidence, his thesis discarded without a hearing, he dropped out and never looked back. The bitterness never left his voice, but neither did the fire. That fire was passed to Tariq, who by high school had built an underground reputation in the city's math scene. Not officially, of course. He never entered the competitions. Those required registration fees and teacher recommendations he couldn't get. But he'd show up anyway, wait until a student dropped out, and volunteer to fill in. His presence alone usually earned an awkward silence. Then he'd win. He always won. One night, after sneaking into a regional math symposium at Northwestern University, he solved a fractal mapping proof in under 15 minutes. The room fell silent. The judges clapped cautiously. Afterward, one of them shook his hand and asked, "Which prep school do you attend?" When Tariq told him he went to Brighton Public and worked at the laundromat on weekends, the judge's face shifted like he'd been tricked. "You're self-taught." "Mostly." The judge smiled tightly, handed him a business card and said, "Consider applying to somewhere more advanced." It was the first time Tariq realized he was exceptional, but also the first time he felt the weight of it being a problem people didn't know what to do with. He never fit in the spaces he earned. By the time senior year rolled around, he'd stopped telling classmates what he wanted to be. He knew what they thought. He heard the jokes. Too smart for the block, too black for the books. College applications were a blur of rejection and indifference. Guidance counselors pushed community colleges or trade schools. One even told him, "You'll want to be realistic." And then on a Tuesday morning in March, while sorting laundry behind the apartment, he saw a large envelope sticking out of the mailbox. Return address, Braxton University. At first he assumed it was a rejection, a courtesy notice. He opened it slowly, ready to shrug it off, but instead his eyes landed on a gold seal. "We are pleased to offer you admission to Braxton University's School of Theoretical Mathematics, with a full academic scholarship, including housing and stipend." His knees gave out. He sat down right there on the concrete floor between baskets of damp clothes. Malcolm found him minutes later, holding the letter in both hands like it was written in fire. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Malcolm crouched down, gently took the letter, read it, and closed his eyes. "I told you," he said quietly. "I told you they'd see." But then, as Malcolm turned the letter over, a loose sheet fell out. A small note, handwritten in red ink. It said, "Diversity pick. Better make it count." There was no name, no signature, just those 4 words. Tariq's heart sank. For every door that opened, there was always a whisper in the room, reminding him he didn't deserve it. That night, Malcolm sat quietly at the kitchen table, reading the letter over and over. "You still going?" he asked. Tariq didn't answer at first. Then he looked at his father and said, "I'm going, but not to fit in." Malcolm nodded. "You're going to break it open." They didn't celebrate. No big family dinner. No graduation photos with balloons. Just quiet resolve. A few weeks later, Tariq packed his bags, placed 3 of his most complex notebooks in a backpack, and kissed his father goodbye. Malcolm hugged him tightly, then handed him a napkin with something scribbled in red ink. "Prove them wrong, but do it quietly." The same napkin Tariq had pulled out in class. The same handwriting. But now there were others. As he sat in his dorm room that night, heart still racing from the lecture hall showdown, Tariq reached into his notebook and pulled out another napkin, one that hadn't come from his father. It had the same red ink, same sharp lettering, but a different message. "They're watching you now. Stay sharp." He froze. The handwriting wasn't Malcolm's. Tariq turned the napkin over. On the back, in faint print, was a university seal. Someone on campus was sending these, and they knew everything. Tariq stood at the edge of the quad, staring up at the towering glass and brick buildings that loomed like silent judges. The manicured lawns, the bronze statues of dead scholars, the smell of espresso wafting from the student cafe. Everything looked like the brochure. Everything looked like promise. But it didn't feel like arrival. From the moment he stepped off the orientation shuttle, there had been an invisible wall around him. Subtle at first passive glances, half smiles from tour leaders, who didn't quite know what to say. He noticed the other black students too, scattered distant, each clinging to their own bubble of solitude. It was as if they'd all silently agreed survival here meant isolation. His dorm advisor, a thin, fast-talking white guy named Connor, had greeted him with an awkward grin. "Yo, you play ball?" he'd asked while handing over his room key. "We got a crazy intramural league." "No," Tariq replied. "Oh, cool. Just figured with the scholarship and all." Tariq didn't correct him. It wouldn't matter. The room was small but neat. White cinder block walls, twin bed, worn desk, a single window overlooking the back of the dining hall. He unpacked quietly, textbooks, 3 thick notebooks, a framed photo of his father holding a mop in one hand, and a math book in the other. The next day, orientation meetings blurred into a cycle of introductions and exclusion. When he said he was majoring in theoretical math, eyebrows always lifted, not in respect but in disbelief. "Really?" was the most common reply. "That's ambitious." Study groups formed before he even had the chance to ask. People didn't say no, they just didn't say anything at all. In his first week of classes, he sat in the front row of multivariable calculus. The professor, a renowned researcher named Dr. Linwood, called on every raised hand but his. Even when Tariq offered a correct correction to a subtle miscalculation on the board, Linwood blinked twice, then moved on without acknowledgement. In applied linear systems, a white student named Travis handed him his bag by mistake, assuming Tariq was the TA. Tariq laughed it off, but when it happened again with someone else, someone who called him staff, he didn't say anything, just nodded and walked away. By the end of the month, his voice had started to shrink. Each time he opened his mouth, he measured it first, not because he doubted his intelligence, but because he understood the weight of being wrong while black in a place like this. That was when Professor Whitaker took an interest. At first it was subtle. After one of the larger calculus lectures, he approached Tariq outside the hall. "You've got an unusual way of looking at things," Whitaker said. Tariq looked up, surprised. "Thanks. Have you considered applying to our advanced logic seminar? We're always looking for sharp thinkers." Tariq was cautious, but curious. The next week, he found himself sitting in a small seminar room with 8 other students, all upperclassmen, all white. No one spoke to him. Not directly, but Whitaker did. He'd ask open-ended questions, and when no one responded fast enough, he'd glance at Tariq. "You have thoughts on this, I'm sure," he'd say. "Your kind tends to have unique perspectives." That phrase hit hard, but no one flinched. Tariq stayed after class once to ask about a proof, but Whitaker didn't answer the question. Instead, he looked at him and said, "You know, you remind me of a student I once taught. Bright but raw. Try not to let arrogance get in your way. Smart isn't rare here. Staying humble is." Tariq nodded, but something felt off. The compliments always came with a blade hidden underneath. He tried to ignore it. He focused on the work, solving complex problems before breakfast, creating his own models late into the night. He filled 3 more notebooks in the span of 2 months, and still he felt smaller every day. In his dorm, the guys on his floor never invited him to parties. They'd blast music, run down the hall drunk, but the knocks never came to his door. One time he walked into the common room, and the music paused. Just for a second. Long enough to send a message. Even the university's Black Student Union felt distant, too caught up in performative activism to notice a freshman quietly slipping into invisibility. And yet Tariq never stopped working, never stopped thinking. Because deep down he was still trying to prove one thing: I belong here. Then one evening, he stayed late in the math building, finishing a set of problem variations he wanted to explore with Whitaker. As he walked past the seminar lounge, he heard voices, laughter. He paused. Whitaker was inside, leaning against the whiteboard with a cup of coffee. One of the grad TAs, a smug-looking guy named Russell, was laughing with him. "I'm telling you," Whitaker said. "I give it another week before the black kid cracks." Russell chuckled. "Which one?" "The freshman. What's his name?" "Tariq? Oh yeah. With the notebooks." Think he's legit? Whitaker shrugged. He's clever. But clever doesn't mean he'll survive here. This place wasn't built for his type. Russell smirked. You think he even knows what an eigenvalue is? Whitaker laughed louder. I'd bet $50 he can't even spell it. Tariq didn't move. He stood there, heart pounding, eyes locked on the edge of the doorway. Every syllable crashed against him like broken glass. He should have walked away. Should have confronted them. Should have said something. But he did none of that. Instead, he turned, walked back to his dorm in silence, and opened a blank page in his notebook. He wrote a single sentence at the top. Survival is not enough. He stared at it for an hour, then turned the page and began writing a new theory. One that flipped the calculus framework from linear to fluid, blending chaos theory with differential forms. He wasn't just trying to survive now. He was building something no one could erase. But he couldn't shake the words, that he can't even spell it. That night, he pulled out the first napkin again. The handwriting matched the red ink note that came with his acceptance letter. The same sharp letters, the same ink shade. There was no way it was a coincidence. He grabbed the envelope that had come with his university welcome packet. It was the same stock paper. Same weight. Same faint watermark. Inside the envelope, hidden behind the welcome pamphlet, was a second note, one he hadn't seen before. It read, "Watch the faculty. Trust no one. Some of them want you gone." And at the bottom, scribbled faintly, "Project Gatekeeper. Do not let them silence you." The campus brochure had called Braxton a hub for innovation, inclusion, and intellectual excellence. But for Tariq, the real curriculum wasn't in any syllabus. It was in the unspoken rules, the subtle exclusions, and the carefully coded reminders of where he did and didn't belong. By his third month, the pattern was clear. Legacy students, sons and daughters of senators, tech moguls, university donors, glided through their coursework with a confidence that wasn't earned, but inherited. They took up space without guilt. They answered wrong, and were praised for critical thinking. They missed deadlines, and got extensions. When they talked, professors listened. When Tariq talked, eyes glazed over. Study groups would accidentally forget to include him in the email chain. One student in his topology class, Drew Palmer, once told him point blank, "It's nothing personal, man. It's just, your methods are kind of unorthodox." Unorthodox was code for "you don't think like us." Tariq didn't ask for help anymore. Not from peers, not from TAs, and certainly not from professors. He started relying on something far more dependable: himself. He filled napkins, margins, and scraps of old printouts with equations, formulas, experimental notations. He carried ideas like fire, scribbling them while walking across campus, while waiting for the shuttle, even during meals. Cafeteria tables became his chalkboards. No one sat next to him, and he preferred it that way. Because the isolation wasn't quiet, it was weaponized. Tutors forgot his name even after multiple sessions. One asked him if he was auditing the class for credit recovery, implying he wasn't a real student. Another asked if he was related to one of the campus janitors. "You look just like this guy I see mopping outside the comp lab," the tutor said with a grin, completely unaware of the weight behind those words. Tariq didn't flinch. He just wrote faster. By December, he was constructing an entirely new theory. It didn't have a name yet, but it danced between chaos theory, multivariable systems, and something else. Something personal. Something sharp. It was the child of his silence. He called it, quietly to himself, fractal identity mapping. It wasn't in any textbook. No one knew it existed. Not yet. His notebooks were coded, filled with hidden marks and altered variable names, in case anyone found them. Because at Braxton, even genius had to be protected, especially when it came wrapped in black skin. The microaggressions continued, like a low, constant hum, subtle enough to be denied, loud enough to cut deep. A classmate once asked him during a break, "So what's your plan after graduation? Teach high school or go corporate?" Tariq replied, "I'm thinking research." The boy blinked. "Like at a real institution?" In a group project for computational logic, his section was rewritten without his consent. When he confronted the team, they smiled awkwardly. "We just wanted to make sure it, matched the format." They meant, "We didn't trust your work." No one said the N-word, not out loud, but Tariq heard its ghost everywhere. In the way people paused before responding to him. In how they over-explained basic concepts to him, assuming ignorance. in how no one asked where he was from, only what program he was a part of. One night, while reviewing lecture notes in the dorm lounge, he overheard a group of white students talking in the corner. Why does he always have to sit like he's discovering the next iPhone? Seriously. Just eat your chicken tenders and calm down. Dude probably thinks he's the Black Einstein. They didn't know he could hear them. Or maybe they did. He left quietly and spent the next 3 hours in his room, redrawing a section of his theory in total silence. He didn't cry. He didn't complain. He calculated, because emotion had no place in their world. But logic? Logic they couldn't erase. Still, the attacks weren't always so subtle. It was a Friday morning when he opened his phone to find 30 missed notifications, group chat messages, mentions, pings from people he barely knew. The Braxton Class of 2026 group chat, a place supposedly meant for community bonding, had exploded overnight. Someone had posted a meme. It was a still frame from the last seminar Tariq had attended, where he'd been solving a complicated function at the board while others stared. Over the image, someone had added bold white text, "When affirmative action solves for X and still gets it wrong." The caption underneath was worse. "At least he's good at cleaning up chalk dust." Tariq stared at the screen. Heart still. Not broken. Not yet. But numb. Comments flooded beneath it. Laughing emojis. Fire emojis. A few nervous yo-chill responses. But most were quiet. No outrage. No outrage meant acceptance. He scrolled. Eyes dead. Some defended him weakly. "That's not cool." Others added fuel. "I heard he's not even published. Must have been a diversity pick. Bet his dad donated mop water." His fingers tightened around the phone. But still he said nothing. Instead he screenshot the meme. Saved it. Archived every comment. Every username. Because this was data now. This was proof. He knew what it meant. They weren't just watching him. They were waiting for him to fail. Waiting to turn his excellence into comedy. But this time, something in him clicked. He walked to his desk, opened a new notebook, the 6th one, and labeled it in red. Hostile systems. Then he wrote his first line of theory. Prejudice doesn't fear intelligence. It fears proof. He had proof now. But there was something else. A second notification. From a restricted number. No name, no subject. Just a single image. It was the same meme. But this time, edited. The caption had been changed. Now it read, "They'll laugh until it's too late." Tariq stared. At the bottom corner of the image, in the same red ink, was a symbol. 3 slashes, 1 dot, and a code. He didn't recognize it, but someone was watching. Someone knew what was happening. Tariq turned back to his notebooks and froze. The edge of one, the one he hadn't opened in weeks, was marked with the same symbol. 3 slashes, 1 dot. It hadn't been there before. The seminar room had a sterile kind of silence, like a courtroom right before a verdict. The overhead lights hummed faintly, and the whiteboards stretched wall to wall spotless except for the ghost shadows of yesterday's equations. Tariq sat near the center, 1 row from the front, his usual spot, close enough to see everything, far enough to disappear if he had to. It was Monday, and the room was unusually full. Word had gotten around. Some students came early, whispering theories. Whitaker's planning something. He's gonna test the freshmen. Bet he finally breaks today. Others just showed up to watch. Not for the math, for the spectacle. Whitaker entered 5 minutes late, as usual, with a manila folder under one arm, and a smug energy that filled the room before he said a word. He placed the folder on the desk, rolled up his sleeves, and picked up a marker. For a moment, he said nothing, just drew a line across the board. Then, in quick, deliberate movements, he began writing. Each symbol was sharp, dense, convoluted. By the 3rd line, students had stopped taking notes. Even the top-tier minds in the room were frowning. It wasn't just complex. It was vicious. By the time he stepped back, the board was a battlefield of nested integrals, divergent series and transformations pulled from obscure fields of fluid topology and real analysis. No annotations, no guiding question, just chaos. Whitaker capped the marker, turned to the room, and spoke with the casual tone of a man discussing the weather. "Just a warm-up to get the blood flowing," he said. A few students laughed nervously. Tariq didn't move. He knew the setup when he saw it. Whitaker scanned the room dramatically, hand resting on his chin. "Who wants to take a shot?" No one volunteered. Not even the graduate students. And then, without looking at his notes, Whitaker said, Mr. Ellis, care to try? Silence. A dozen heads turned at once. Tariq kept his eyes on the board, not because he was afraid of the problem, but because he recognized it. This wasn't just difficult. It was deliberately designed to mimic an open problem from an obscure mathematical journal, published 5 years ago, one never solved. The kind of problem that would take teams of researchers weeks to untangle. But here it was a warm-up. This wasn't math. This was theater. The kind where the main act was public shame. Tariq stood slowly. The whispers started before he reached the front. Dead man walking. He's gonna choke. This is what happens when you admit diversity over ability. He heard every word, felt each one like static crawling up his spine. Whitaker leaned against the podium, arms crossed, eyes fixed on Tariq with polite interest, like a hunter watching a trapped animal squirm before the kill. No pressure, he said. Just curious to see how you process. Tariq picked up the marker, but he didn't write. He stared at the problem for a long moment, then glanced over his shoulder, and realized something terrifying. This wasn't just about him anymore. In the back corner of the room sat Russell, the grad TA, who'd laughed with Whitaker about whether Tariq could spell eigenvalue. 2 rows ahead, Drew Palmer smirked with his phone pointed discreetly at the board, recording, already planning the caption. It would go viral by lunch. He could feel it. One wrong move, one shaky attempt, and he'd be a meme again. No win. Just survival. And yet he didn't panic. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. The room went still. He unfolded it carefully. It wasn't his napkin. It wasn't a solution. It was something he'd received earlier that morning, slipped under his dorm door in a blank envelope. One line. Red ink. Use their expectations against them. No signature. Just the symbol again. 3 slashes. 1 dot. Wordy. He didn't know who was sending them. But this note was different. Timed. Intentional. As if someone knew what was coming. He stared at the paper for 3 seconds. Then quietly, placed the marker back down. I won't solve it, he said, loud enough for the room to hear. A ripple of confusion. Whitaker raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? Tariq turned to face the class. This isn't a real problem. It's a performance. Me solving it gives legitimacy to the trap. More murmurs. A few gasps. Whitaker stepped forward, his voice tight now. You were asked to participate in a seminar discussion. If you choose not to. It's not a discussion, Tariq interrupted, his voice still calm. It's a spectacle, and I won't play the role you picked for me. The room froze. It wasn't what they expected. Tariq reached into his bag and pulled out a different sheet. This one wasn't red. It was white, crisp. A single page from his private theory. Instead, I propose a different problem. One that builds a new framework. One that respects logic over theatrics. He held it up. No one said a word. Whitaker's face twitched, just slightly. You're out of line, he said. Tariq looked him dead in the eye. No, sir. I'm just tired of being in yours. A beat. Then he turned and pinned the new paper beside Whitaker's chaos. The equations were elegant, efficient, grounded in principles, but different. They introduced a recursive mapping structure that simplified the very field Whitaker had tried to weaponize. Russell leaned forward. Even Drew stopped recording. Because what was on that paper, it made sense. More than the mess on the board. Whitaker stepped forward, reading it. His jaw tightened. Then he turned to the class, voice stiff. We'll resume next week. Dismissal. Abrupt. Rushed.
But no one moved.
They kept looking at Tariq, at the 2 equations, at the contrast between arrogance and clarity. Tariq walked back to his seat slowly, folded the red ink note, and tucked it back into his pocket. He knew what just happened. He'd flipped the script. He hadn't won. Not yet. But he hadn't been broken either. Still, as the class emptied and students murmured to one another, Tariq noticed something strange. Russell, the grad TA, was staring at him. Not with disdain this time, but something closer to fear. He left quickly. Too quickly. Tariq gathered his things and left the seminar room. The wind outside had turned colder, sharper. He walked across the quad in silence, past the bronze statues and ivy-covered walls, back toward his dorm. But when he got there, something was waiting on his bed. Another envelope. Plain. Unmarked. Inside wasn't a napkin or a warning. It was a single Polaroid photo. A man, black, early 20s, standing at a chalkboard, mid-solution. Malcolm Ellis, Tariq's father, but not from recent years. from decades ago, wearing a Braxton University hoodie. Scrawled on the back of the photo, in that same red ink, he was here, and they erased him. The photo shook in Tariq's hands, its edges soft with time, its message razor sharp. His father at Braxton. Not Brighton. Not some visiting seminar. Not rumor. Braxton University. Tariq stared at the chalkboard in the photo, zooming in on the barely visible notations behind Malcolm's shoulder. His eyes traced every symbol, every partial equation. Something about it looked familiar. Then it hit him. Two of the operators mirrored his own work, a theory he'd been developing in isolation, thinking it was his own creation. It wasn't. It was a continuation. He set the photo down with trembling fingers. For years his father had refused to talk about why he never finished his graduate work, only offering vague warnings about how this system eats you alive. Now the meaning was snapping into place. Not paranoia, not defeat, burial. They'd erased him, just like they were trying to do now. And yet somehow, Malcolm's work had survived, in whispers, in fragments, in the bloodline that carried it forward. Tariq hadn't just inherited a passion for math. He'd inherited an unfinished revolution. That night, Tariq sat on the floor with all his notebooks spread around him, each page brimming with scribbled equations, abstract loops, recursive structures. He flipped through them rapidly, cross-referencing shapes, methods, even errors that now looked intentional in hindsight. What he was building wasn't a solution to an existing problem. It was a new language, a theory grounded in chaos stability and non-linear recursion, a hybrid model that predicted not just outcome, but the tendency of systems to rebel against their own design. It was poetry disguised as logic. He didn't have a name for it, but in his mind, it sounded like resistance. His latest notebook was different from the others. Smaller, bound in leather. Inside, every idea was refined to its purest form, as if he were writing for someone else to discover it long after he was gone. Page after page, his handwriting sharpened. Not rushed, not wild, but certain. At the top of the newest page he wrote, "The napkin theory." Because that's how it began. On scraps. Margins. Dismissed spaces. Ideas not meant to survive, but that did anyway. The next morning he brought one of those napkin pages to class, not to present, but to carry like armor. The seminar room was colder than usual. Whitaker didn't mention the previous lecture. He skipped directly to a new topic, avoiding eye contact with Tariq, and drowning the class in theory-heavy slides. But midway through, something shifted. Russell, the TA who had recorded him, laughed at him, feared him, walked by Tariq's desk, paused and looked down. His eyes landed on the napkin. The numbers. The loops. The sequence embedded inside an irregular spiral. Russell froze. "What is that?" he muttered, louder than he intended. Whitaker turned sharply. "Is there a problem?" Russell didn't answer. He just kept staring. "These aren't standard. Where'd you get this?" Tariq didn't flinch. "I wrote it." Russell looked up, visibly unsettled. "No, I mean, who taught you this?" Whitaker walked over slowly, skeptical. He took the napkin, examined it, his mouth twisted. "This looks imaginative." Tariq said nothing. "Creative fiction," Whitaker continued, tossing the napkin onto the desk. "Mathematically interesting, but unverifiable. This isn't how real theory works." Russell was still staring. He leaned down, eyes wide. This structure, it's recursive in a non-terminating field. You built that without a modeling program?" Tariq nodded. "I didn't need one." The room had gone quiet. Students looked between Whitaker and Russell, trying to decide who to believe. Whitaker cleared his throat, brushing it off. "Let's focus on the curriculum. We don't have time to dissect amateur art." But Russell kept his gaze on Tariq, unsettled. After class he followed Tariq out into the hallway. "That framework," he said, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "It looks like the early work of someone I read once, years ago, before they scrubbed the journals." "Who?" "I don't know," Russell said. "It was pre-digital archives, some black grad student in the late 90s. But then the work vanished, like, completely erased." Tariq said nothing. He didn't need to. Back in his dorm, Tariq unfolded the napkin again and stared at the pattern Russell had fixated on. It was recursive, yes. But there was something else embedded in the spiral, sub-symbols stitched into the edges, like watermark DM. It wasn't just theory. It was a fingerprint. That night, Braxton hosted a panel with visiting researchers, including a highly respected guest from MIT, Dr. Kendra Lavoie, an expert in mathematical philosophy and the architecture of chaos. Tariq attended quietly, sitting in the back. During the Q&A, while others asked rehearsed questions about AI and machine learning, he raised his hand, slowly, calmly. Dr. Lavoie pointed to him.
What's your question?
Tariq didn't hesitate. He stood and unfolded the napkin. I've been working on a recursive stability mapping, using chaotic resistance modeling. But I noticed that certain systems don't collapse. They reorganize in ways the math doesn't predict, unless you assume the system wants to fight back. Lavoie's expression changed. She stepped off the stage and walked toward him, reading the napkin in his hand. She took a long pause, then looked him directly in the eye, and asked, softly but clearly, "Who taught you this?" The room fell silent. Tariq's throat tightened. "No one," he said. It came from silence. But in his mind he saw the photo of his father again, the chalkboard, the hidden work. Lavoie turned the napkin over. Then her face paled. "What does G47 mean to you?" she asked. Tariq blinked. "You've seen that before." She didn't answer. Instead, she handed the napkin back and walked away fast. Her assistant scrambled to follow her. Tariq stood alone in a room full of students, all suddenly aware that something much bigger was unfolding. When Tariq returned to his dorm that night, he found a letter slid under his door. No name, no envelope, just one line. "They buried your father's theory under Project Gatekeeper. You just dug it back up." Tariq barely slept that night. The letter, the MIT researcher's reaction, the rising storm in his gut, none of it let his mind settle. His desk light stayed on till morning, casting long shadows across stacks of papers and open notebooks. The napkin theory sat at the center of it all, its spiral diagram now pinned to the wall above his bed like a map of something ancient and unfinished. The line on the letter echoed in his head. "They buried your father's theory under Project Gatekeeper. You just dug it back up." He didn't know who they were, but he was starting to understand what they'd done. Sometime around 4:43 a.m., his laptop chimed. A new email. Subject line: Reyes Spiral Logic. Urgent. From Kendra.Lavoie. I.M.T. Tariq hesitated before clicking. Inside was no introduction, no small talk, just a single line. "Do not show this to anyone. This is not just math." Attached was a password-protected PDF and a secure link to a private research cloud. A second line followed. "You're not just solving equations, you're unearthing sabotage." His chest tightened. He opened the PDF with trembling fingers after entering the attached passcode. It was titled, Nonlinear Autonomy and the Collapse Paradox. Declassified draft. Author Malcolm R. Ellis. His father. The paper was unfinished, scattered with handwritten notes and footnoted annotations. But the core concept, it was identical to Tariq's napkin theory, slightly rawer, more speculative. But the backbone was unmistakable. And on the third page, redacted in black bar after black bar, was the phrase, "Gatekeeper flag, reject for review." Tariq sat back, stunned. His father hadn't just been a promising scholar. He had birthed a theory so advanced, so disruptive, that someone in the system had flagged it and killed it. No academic failure, no lack of merit, sabotage. Tariq stood, pacing his room like the floor might give him answers. He grabbed his phone and hovered over his father's number. But he stopped himself. Malcolm had buried this truth for a reason. A scar that deep doesn't heal with questions. It needs justice. Back at the desk, Tariq clicked the second link. A collaboration portal, secure encrypted, with 5 names listed as collaborators. MIT, Cambridge. 2 unknowns, and then his Spiral 47. His hands hovered over the keyboard. The offer was clear. Dr. Lavoie wanted to work with him on a research basis, off the grid. A temporary NDA had already been generated in the link. This was real. He could walk away from Braxton, away from Whitaker, from the slurs, the slow erasure, the polite humiliation. He could choose freedom. But something stopped him. A flicker in his mind, his father holding that mop with one hand, a math textbook in the other. The boyhood memory of watching his father scrub graffiti off a classroom wall while muttering about matrices under his breath. This wasn't just about escaping anymore. This was about reclaiming. His hands moved quickly. He downloaded the documents, signed the digital NDA, but he didn't submit it yet. He needed more than just partnership. He needed the truth, a full truth. That afternoon, he took a bold step. He printed a portion of the napkin theory, just the spiral structure with no annotations, and slipped it anonymously into a campus research thread under a pseudonym, the janitor's son. No name, no origin, no affiliation. He posted it to a small but tightly watched mathematics forum known only to a handful of academic insiders. Then he closed his laptop. If it was real, it would ripple. If it wasn't, it would disappear. Either way, he needed to know, outside of the name, the skin, the stereotype. Who would listen to a ghost? By the next morning, it had been downloaded 700. By nightfall, reposted on 3 other niche forums, each comment section bubbling with confusion and curiosity. Who is this? Where did this structure come from? This isn't student-level work. This is field-breaking. Within 48 hours, the theory had a name circulating in academic chat rooms, the janitor's spiral. Still anonymous, still without credit. But now, unignorable. Back on campus, professors started whispering about it in the halls. Tariq overheard one in the dining area. Some underground genius just flipped recursion theory on its head. It's got MIT scrambling. Whitaker remained silent, but his eyes twitched every time someone mentioned the phrase. The tipping point came when a faculty member forwarded the theory link to Braxton's departmental email chain. The subject line read, "Potential plagiarism. Student work." The email had only one body line. If this is coming from within, someone needs to take credit before another school does. And just like that, the school wanted him. The same school that had ignored him, shunned him, laughed at him. Now they needed to own him. Tariq received an invitation to meet with the Dean of Sciences. No context, just a brief conversation. He didn't respond. Instead, he sent a private email to not to Lavoie, but to the encrypted address embedded in the research portal. He typed, "Before I sign anything, I need to know what Project Gatekeeper was, and why my father was erased." No answer came that night. But something else did. Another email. No subject. No sender. Just one line. "They'll offer you credit. Then they'll try to own it. Stay anonymous, or you'll vanish like him." As Tariq closed his inbox, a new post appeared on the forum. This time from a verified Cambridge researcher. "We've found matching fragments from a buried 1999 paper. Whoever the janitor's son is, you're not just brilliant. You're finishing someone else's war." The buzz spread faster than Tariq anticipated. What began as a ghost theory scribbled on napkins and buried in encrypted forums had now found its way into conference discussions, grad seminars, and peer review circles across the country. The phrase "the janitor's spiral" trended for 2 days in academic subreddits. MIT's chaos theory department began a formal review. Cambridge requested a call for publication rights. A small publication in Zurich offered to host the first preprint. And Braxton?
Braxton fell silent.
Not a word from the dean. No press release. No panel. Just a collective hush from the mathematics department. Like the whole institution was holding its breath, waiting to see how it could spin this in its favor. Tariq kept quiet, watching it all unfold from his dorm, until one afternoon, a casual glance at the campus website stopped him cold. Right there on the homepage, a banner headline. "Braxton graduate student breaks new ground in recursive theory." Beneath it, a photo of Russell, the smirking TA, the one who had mocked Tariq in seminars, who had stared too long at his napkin. The article gushed over a revolutionary framework derived from independent theoretical modeling, attributing the discovery to Russell's dedicated research and collaboration with senior faculty. Tariq's jaw clenched. The diagrams were identical. The equations, the loops, the symbol structures. It was his work down to the smallest recursive break, except now it had a different name. The Palmer-Russell recursive model. And his name? Absent. He read the article 3 times before slamming the laptop shut. A numbness settled in his chest. He didn't know whether to scream or laugh. He'd anticipated dismissal, even doubt, but outright theft, by a man who couldn't even explain the framework when he first saw it. He walked the campus in a daze. Every conversation he passed was a reminder. Students praising Russell, speculating about tenure-track offers, grad programs, excited to interview him. The same students who barely acknowledged Tariq 2 weeks ago now championed a stolen brilliance without question. He went to Whitaker's office the next morning. The door was open. Whitaker sat calmly, a cup of espresso in hand, reading a research digest. "Professor," Tariq began, steady but sharp. "We need to talk." Whitaker didn't look up. "I assume this is about the publication?" "I wrote that theory. Now Whitaker looked up. Expression unreadable. Do you have proof? I have the original napkins. The notebooks. My timestamps. Everything before Russell even saw it. Whitaker sighed. Look, Tariq, I understand you feel connected to the work, but Russell has already submitted it for peer review. He provided references, progress logs, institutional access records. You posted anonymously, didn't you? Tariq stared at him. So that disqualifies me. It complicates things. You mean it makes it easier to erase me? Whitaker's eyes hardened. I suggest you be careful, Mr. Ellis. Accusations like this, especially in this environment, can backfire. You wouldn't want to damage your future over feelings. Feelings. He left before the fury inside him made him say something that would cost him even more. Back in his dorm, he pulled up every record he had. Scanned napkins, dated PDFs, raw code drafts. He contacted the moderators of the math forum where he'd first posted. One of them, a doctoral candidate from India, confirmed that Tariq's upload predated Russell's submission by 5 days. He offered to write a statement. 2 more researchers from the UK offered the same. But none of it mattered at Braxton. The university circled its wagons quickly. When Tariq emailed the dean, he got a curt reply. Thank you for your message. We are currently reviewing all claims of authorship. In the meantime, we encourage collegial discourse and internal resolution. Internal resolution meant shut up or disappear. His inbox remained filled with praise from strangers. But on campus, doors closed faster than ever. Even his classmates, the few who had quietly admired him before, now looked at him with discomfort. The unspoken question in their eyes. Why is he making this about race? And maybe that was the part that hurt the most. The way people clung to the illusion of fairness, even as it collapsed around them. One afternoon, he passed Russell in the hallway. Russell didn't speak, didn't even smile. Just raised a coffee cup like a silent salute. Tariq stopped. You know it, it's mine. Russell paused, then said flatly, you gave it away the moment you tried to stay invisible, and walked off. That night, Tariq sat at his desk, his fingers shaking with rage. The walls of his room felt closer now, pressing in like concrete guilt. He thought of Malcolm. How many times had this happened before? How many ideas buried beneath white names and polished shoes? He pulled out the photo again. His father at the chalkboard, that silent brilliance in his eyes. They stole from him too, but he didn't go down quietly. Neither would Tariq. That same night, something pulled at him. A hunch, a gut instinct. He logged into the university's digital support portal, where students could request surveillance reviews for dorm security issues. He remembered a detail, the envelope that held the Malcolm photo. It wasn't mailed. It had been placed on his bed. He submitted a request for camera footage from the hallway outside his dorm, covering the 3-day window before the publication leaked. It took 24. Then a secure link appeared in his inbox. He clicked it, holding his breath. The footage was grainy but clear. A silent timestamp ticked across the screen. At 2:17 a.m., 2 days before the leak, someone entered his hallway. Tariq's eyes narrowed. It wasn't Russell. It was Whitaker. Alone.
No file in his hand.
But he reached into his coat pocket before pausing in front of Tariq's room. A subtle motion. A door opening. A few seconds inside. Then gone. Just like that. No log. No record. Tariq stared at the paused frame. Whitaker's face just clear enough to be undeniable. And just beneath the still image, a chilling detail. Footage flagged. Access by administrative override. A knock on his dorm door jolted Tariq from the spiral equations spread across his desk. When he opened it, 4 faces, 1 black, 1 Latinx, 2 Asian, stood in the hallway, huddled as if hiding from shadows. None wore the usual bravado of campus activists. Their eyes were wary, determined. We know what they did to you, said the Latina, a political science major named Elena. We've been in your shoes. They stepped in quietly, closing the door behind them. From the start, it wasn't a plea for attention. It was a shared confession of trauma. Each had a story of brilliance sidelined. A Latinx poet whose original computational metaphor was ghostwritten by faculty. An Asian programmer whose code was presented at symposiums with no credit. A black historian whose thesis was folded into a professor's book footnotes. They didn't want revenge. They wanted justice. Together, Tariq felt the weight of the room shift. His isolation shattered. They called themselves the Collective, a network of marginalized students documenting academic erasure, one incident at a time. Elena opened her laptop. "Look at this," she said. "Emails, project files, submission timestamps, real data, not protest slogans." They began combing through shared documents, screenshots, lectures, grading rubrics, pieces of evidence, texts, calendars, email headers. Building a mosaic of patterns, they constructed timelines showing how credit shifted, ideas disappeared, recognition rerouted. There were sobering discoveries, cross-department collaborations, that quietly excluded students of color, multi-author projects where Black contributors were relegated to acknowledgments, grading curves that penalized undervalued brilliance. They worked late into the night, as if urgency was the only way to keep fear at bay. Midway through, Tariq realized something unexpected. One of the files among Elena's records was titled Project Gatekeeper. The name struck him first, then below it, a row of names highlighted in red. One of them was his, stark among the blacked-out entries. His breath caught. He'd heard the name before, in the anonymous note, in Lavoie's email. Gatekeeper wasn't just a code. It was a program. A program to gatekeep. He swallowed. "Where did this come from?" he asked, voice low. A shy Asian student named Jun stepped forward. "Faculty archives. Someone leaked administrative memos, emails. But the drive is locked behind department-level credentials. It's older than digital trail logs. A secret board." They stared at the file, disbelief and anger coiling in the air. Elena leaned forward, tracing lines with her finger. "It's your name in red next to others. Marginalized students with stolen work," she said. "This isn't coincidence." Tariq nodded. They coordinated erasure. A hush fell. Then, without warning, the lights flickered. Elena's laptop pinged. A new file appeared. Gatekeeper records. Anxiety spiked. They exchanged glances. Elena hesitated, then clicked. Folders spilled open. PDFs of internal meeting minutes. Transcripts. Email chains between faculty. Someone had documented the decision. They scrolled through text. Erasure more effective when targets can't trace it. Fusion authorship suggested. Add legacy student names. Gatekeeper advising. Avoid public recognition of Black-generated theories. Fingers shook. The words were ugly and undeniable. The room felt colder. Then another message popped up in the folder. A video file titled simply Gatekeeper Evidence. Tariq swallowed. Elena opened it. On the screen, the words appeared over grainy footage. Documents being shredded. Footage of Whitaker's office. Hidden cam. The frame paused on a folder labeled Ellis Spiral Notes. The camera shook. Whitaker's hands dropped a napkin into a bin. As the camera caught it clearly, he never knew it was recording. Tariq stared, silent anger rising. Furious. Grief-stricken. That napkin was his. But history said it was Russell's. And now, proof it had been stolen. An unexpected twist. The data didn't just destroy erasure, it annexed it. The collective broke apart in murmured shock. Now what? The question echoed. Tariq closed his eyes, breathing deeply. If they could make this public, if they could show the footage, the emails, the gatekeeper's archive, they'd not only reclaim Tariq's theory, they'd expose a university-wide betrayal. This was bigger than one stolen idea. It was a system. Tariq swallowed hard, voice steady. "We expose this?" At that moment his laptop chimed. He looked at the screen and froze. Because it wasn't another student forwarding files. It was an email from Professor Whitaker. Subject, urgent. "We need to talk." Tariq didn't reply to Whitaker's email. He didn't need to. He'd seen everything he needed to see. The faculty's silence, the stolen theory, the lies stacked like scaffolding around the institution's pride. None of it shocked him anymore. But what the email did confirm was this. Whitaker was scared. And scared people make mistakes. The collective met that night, in the off-campus apartment of a senior named Keisha, an engineering major who'd been sidelined 3 semesters in a row. Despite outscoring everyone in her program, her walls were covered in sticky notes and string maps connecting timelines, stolen work, and professors who always seemed to forget the right names. At the center of it all was Project Gatekeeper. "We've been documenting racism in shadows," Keisha said, pacing. "But Tariq's footage, that's sunlight. That's how systems rot. They die in daylight." They had the plan. And the timing. The next morning, Braxton's faculty board would hold its annual closed-door review, a space designed for secrecy. No students, no recordings, no oversight, just whiteboards, budget talk, tenure discussions, and institutional myth-making. Tariq's idea was simple. Flip the surveillance. Not expose everything at once. Just enough. Enough to fracture the lie. June, the coder in the collective, had already mapped the university's outdated security system. It was laughably vulnerable. One breach through an old faculty Zoom integration, and they'd be inside. Tariq handed him the video clip, the one of Whitaker discarding the napkin, and 2 email chains from the gatekeeper archive. June nodded. Give me until 10:50. At exactly 10:00 a.m., faculty members filed into the boardroom in Founders Hall, an old stone building that reeked of power and tradition. Tariq didn't attend. Neither did the other students. They didn't need to. They were already. From the library basement, the collective watched the meeting stream in real time, piped through June's private server. Dean Holloway opened with her usual tone, measured, polite. Then Whitaker took the floor. A PowerPoint appeared, Russell's face, the now published Palmer-Russell recursive model, and a proposed honor nomination from the university. Tariq clenched his jaw. Keisha pressed record. And then, the stream glitched, just once. Just long enough for June to insert the overlay. Footage playing. Internal investigation. The faculty stared, confused, as the wall monitor suddenly cut to surveillance video. Whitaker entering Tariq's dorm. A timestamp flashed at the top. Silence fell like a dropped curtain. Then came the second clip, an audio-only recording. Whitaker's voice muffled but clear. If we let Ellis take credit, the entire department gets audited. Russell can hold the theory. He's clean, smart, presentable. The room gasped. Someone coughed. Another voice, Professor Arnold, history department chair. But Ellis wrote it. He submitted first. Whitaker again. He's too risky. Once they get emotional, it's not about math anymore. It's a lawsuit waiting to happen. Tariq stared at the screen, hands shaking. He hadn't heard this part. This was new, a deeper cut than he expected. In the boardroom, chaos cracked open. Dean Holloway stood, eyes wide. Where did this come from? No one answered. Professor Linwood, the one who'd ignored Tariq in his first class, stood awkwardly. We need to pause this. But Keisha had already triggered the next stream. A series of names scrolled across the screen. Students of color, across 5 years, each matched with a project title, a revised title, and a final author. More than 20 matched exactly what the collective had tracked. And beside each name was a gatekeeper ID. Then came the email chain. From Whitaker Braxton to gatekeepers, at intranet. Ellis is getting too close. He doesn't know he's finishing his father's theory, but it's triggering institutional patterns. We need to contain this fast. Russell's version will stick. Make sure the records match. No one breathed. At the library, Tariq stood slowly. They knew, all of them. Alina, eyes wide, whispered, "Your father wasn't just sabotaged. He was catalogued." Back in the boardroom, voices exploded. I had nothing to do with this. Why is this on our system? This better be fake. But amidst the panic, one professor spoke softly. Dr. Carmen Osei, Literature Department, and one of the only black faculty members present. She stood, voice calm, cutting. I warned this board 3 years ago about departmental erasure. You called it anecdotal. Now it's on camera. Someone snapped, "This is still under review." Dr. Osei turned to the screen, watching the last frame freeze on Tariq's face. She said, almost to herself, "They tried to erase a legacy. He turned it into a mirror." At that moment, June launched the final piece. Tariq's voice filled the boardroom. Pre-recorded, firm, resolute. I never asked for their respect. I just asked for space to think. Instead, they stole from me. Like they stole from my father, and probably from every student whose name never made it to a cover page. But this time, you can't bury what's already burning. The stream paused, buffering. In the library, Tariq stepped forward. Play the last file. June nodded. But just as he hit enter, the screen went black. Everything froze. The stream cut mid-sentence. Static. A blinking cursor. Tariq's face fell. Is it us? June shook his head. No. They pulled the whole internal server offline. Admin override. Keisha cursed under her breath. They're going nuclear. Tariq's phone buzzed. A new email. No sender. No subject. Just one line. If you want the rest of Gatekeeper, check Whitaker's private archive. But you'll need admin credentials, and you're already being watched. The campus woke to sirens of a different kind. Not from fire trucks or ambulances, but from phones buzzing uncontrollably, notifications stacking faster than people could read them. Screens filled with hashtags, news headers reposted clips, and one name that now echoed beyond Braxton's ivy-covered walls: Justice for Tariq. The leaked footage from the faculty meeting had hit the public like an earthquake. Someone no one in the collective would say who had mirrored the broadcast to a secure cloud, and then passed it to an independent journalist with a reputation for exposing institutional racism in higher education. Within hours, the clip was everywhere. Tariq Ellis, stolen theory. Gatekeeper program, erased legacy. Twitter, Reddit, TikTok, LinkedIn. Even conservative pundits chimed in, not with support, but with spin. Affirmative action backlash. Meritocracy, undermined.
Race-baiting math hoax?
But the truth was too sharp to distort. Tariq's theory had already gained recognition in academic spaces. Now it had a face, a history, a story. Students organized rallies by noon. Protesters packed the quad by sunset. Black, Latinx, white, Asian allies from neighboring colleges. Posters of Tariq's equations fluttered in the wind like coded flags. Someone spray-painted the phrase, "They tried to delete him," across the campus bell tower. Malcolm Ellis showed up that evening. He didn't speak on a stage. He didn't give interviews. He stood in the crowd in a worn-out coat, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the university seal. When Tariq found him near the edge of the protest, neither spoke at first. Then Malcolm said quietly, "They came for me too. But you broke the silence." Tariq nodded, swallowing hard. Back on campus, things moved faster than ever before. The university released a generic statement. "We are aware of recent allegations involving faculty conduct, and are conducting a full internal review. Braxton remains committed to academic integrity and inclusion." Whitaker was placed on administrative leave, pending an investigation. No termination. No apology. Russell? He scrubbed his social media, deactivated his email, and disappeared from campus. But the institution held its line, cold and clean. Then came the backhanded move. Tariq received a letter in his campus mailbox. Standard white envelope, university letterhead. Subject: review of scholarship standing. It claimed he had violated student conduct protocols by accessing restricted systems and disrupting internal academic procedures. It didn't mention the Gatekeeper files. Didn't mention the footage. It was retaliation, dressed as policy. The collective exploded with fury. "How dare they?" Keisha shouted. "They buried your father. Now they want to bury you in paperwork." Tariq read the letter twice. His hands didn't shake. He didn't flinch. But something in him hardened. They weren't going to let him walk away intact. If they couldn't silence his voice, they'd undermine his credibility. If they couldn't discredit his theory, they'd try to revoke his place. And yet he didn't break. Instead, he met with an attorney. A civil rights group offered representation pro bono. A tenured professor at a rival university offered him a research position for the spring. No questions asked. But Tariq wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. Because there was still more buried. Whitaker's private archive. Whatever it held might be the last piece. The collective got to work again, cracking administrative login portals. Elena had an older copy of faculty credentials from a departmental breach the year before, but they were outdated. June cross-referenced IP addresses from the internal network. Keisha traced access logs using the security glitch from the faculty meeting hack. They were close. But then, just when things began to surge toward resolution, reality slammed back with cruel precision. That night, Tariq returned to his dorm after back-to-back interviews and student strategy meetings. He was exhausted. His backpack sagged from the weight of books he hadn't touched in days. His notebooks were spread across his bed. A thin envelope waited on his desk. No return address. No postmark. Just his name, in block letters. All caps. He opened it slowly, half expecting another administrative warning. But inside was a single sheet of paper. Typed. No signature. "Keep quiet, or we'll dig into your father's past. We know what he did in '99. We know what you're hiding too." Tariq froze. He read it again. The air thinned. His chest tightened. Not in fear but in fury. Because he knew his father didn't do anything wrong. He didn't have to. That's what they counted on. Just being was enough to make him a target. But now they were threatening to rewrite the past all over again. The next morning, Tariq brought the letter to the collective. He laid it on the table without saying a word. Elena paled. Keisha clenched her fists. June whispered, "They're cornered." Tariq nodded slowly. "Good." Later that night, as he prepared to access the faculty server from a hidden portal, June burst into the room, breathless. "Wait. Pause everything." "What's wrong?" Tariq asked. June's voice cracked. "Whitaker's archive just went live, but not to us. To the press." The moment June said it, "Whitaker's archive just went live, but to the press." A chill gripped the room. The collective scrambled to confirm it. Within minutes, news outlets were posting screenshots from the leaked server. Decades-old memos, faculty review documents, internal disciplinary notices, all under a massive header. Project Gatekeeper Archives. Leaked files show decades of systemic sabotage. But that wasn't the headline that sent Tariq's pulse racing. It was this one. Malcolm Ellis, the mathematician Braxton tried to erase. There it was. His father's name. Finally, public. Not as a janitor, not as a footnote, but as a buried scholar with unfinished work and a stolen future. Tariq clicked the article and felt his knees weaken. The leak included scans of a 1999 disciplinary hearing against Malcolm sealed until now. The accusation? Unverifiable theoretical structures, unethical academic conduct, and excessive deviation from institutional standards. In short, too brilliant, too unorthodox, too black to be trusted. His theory? A prototype of what Tariq would later call the napkin theory. Only it had a different name back then. The Ellis Convergence. What stunned Tariq most wasn't the content. It was the names. On the disciplinary board, Dr. Whitaker, then a junior faculty member, now a chair. Tariq's eyes burned. That's why Whitaker had known the patterns. That's why he had buried the napkin. He'd seen this theory before, 25 years ago. He wasn't threatened by its brilliance. He was haunted by it. He recognized it the moment Tariq wrote it on the board. Tariq stood in silence for a full minute. Then he walked out the door. His father's apartment still smelled like coffee and linen floor cleaner. Malcolm sat at the small table, newspaper folded neatly beside a chipped mug. He looked up, saw the storm in his son's face, and said nothing. Tariq dropped the printout of the article in front of him. Malcolm read it once, twice, then quietly folded the paper. "You weren't going to tell me?" Tariq asked, his voice calm but cracked. "I didn't think you'd need to carry that weight," Malcolm said. "I already am." Malcolm sighed. "It's not about shame. It's about survival. When they shut me down, I decided to let them. I couldn't protect the work and protect you at the same time." Tariq's voice trembled. "They destroyed your name. I let them." "Why?" Malcolm leaned back in his chair. "Because when they erase you, the only thing that survives is silence. I thought maybe if I was quiet long enough you'd never have to go through it. But I was wrong." Tariq swallowed hard. "I'm not mad you didn't tell me. I'm mad they made you feel like you had to disappear." Malcolm didn't answer. He walked into the bedroom. Tariq followed. In the closet, behind a stack of old laundry bins, Malcolm pulled out a battered storage box. He placed it on the bed and opened it with careful hands. Inside were papers, dozens, folders marked Ellis Research, rejections, unpublished and denied. There were court transcripts, internal university memos, a rejection letter from the same journal that later published one of Whitaker's early papers, featuring a theory with suspiciously similar structuring. Tariq stared. Then Malcolm handed him an envelope, yellowed at the edges, still sealed. The front said, "For my son, the real mathematician." Tariq hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. "Tariq, if you're reading this, then you've seen enough of the world to know it was never built for boys like us to win quietly. I gave up the fight so you could choose if you wanted to fight at all. But if you are fighting, know this. You are not alone. You are my proof. My math, my theory. Keep showing them what they tried to erase." Tears blurred the ink. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in his jacket pocket. When he turned back to his father, Malcolm was watching him, not as a parent, but as a peer. "They're afraid of us," Tariq said softly, "because we built something they can't control." Malcolm nodded once. "So now, you finish it." That night, the collective gathered in silence. No celebration, just shared focus. They digitized Malcolm's files, matched the theory drafts to current structures, highlighted every instance of mirrored plagiarism across departments. The web was wide. Tariq spent the whole night writing, pulling pieces of his and his father's work together into a final, unified theory. He called it the Ellis spiral, a theory not just of recursion and logic, but of resistance encoded in systems built to crush it. By sunrise, the document was 74 pages long, peer-reviewed in real time by researchers from 3 continents. Then came the twist. A new article dropped, not from student activists or independent journalists, but from the Washington Ledger, a national outlet. Its headline, Braxton University Exposed, 25 Years of Intellectual Theft and the Return of the Real Author. The subhead listed names of faculty members connected to the Gatekeeper program, living ghosts from Malcolm's disciplinary hearing. And one of them, still employed, still tenured, was now Dean Holloway. As Tariq scrolled to the final paragraph, a live update appeared on the page. Anonymous faculty whistleblower confirms Malcolm Ellis's work was suppressed intentionally, and his son's was flagged before submission. Internal email suggests both were seen as threats to the institution's control of narrative. The boardroom didn't look like a place where legacies were destroyed. Polished wood floors, velvet-backed chairs, water pitchers and notepads laid neatly at each seat. A long mahogany table that had seen decades of decisions, hiring, firing, tenure, silence. But on this day, everything felt different. Not because the room had changed, because who walked in had. Tariq Ellis stood at the threshold, holding a leather binder in one hand and a small framed photo in the other, the one of his father at the chalkboard. No coat, no suit, just a navy sweater, dark jeans, and the quiet confidence of someone who had already survived what they were hoping to stop. Behind him, the doors were flanked by cameras. This meeting wasn't private anymore. Student activists from across the state had rallied to demand transparency. Faculty members from other universities signed petitions. The collective outrage had forced the university to agree. Tariq would be allowed to present his case, publicly, in front of the full board. The cameras would roll, and the world would be watching. Dean Holloway sat at the far end of the table, stiff in a blazer and pearls. Whitaker's seat was empty. He'd officially taken a leave of absence, though his influence still lingered like stale cologne. A board member cleared her throat. Mr. Ellis, you may proceed. Tariq placed the framed photo gently on the table. This is Malcolm Ellis, he said, his voice steady. My father, a mathematician, a janitor, and a victim of this university. He opened the binder and pulled out the first page, an image of the Ellis spiral, hand-drawn in red and black ink.
This was his theory.
In 1999, it was labeled unverifiable, dangerous, ethically questionable. You erased him. He paused, then held up the second page. This is mine. Same structure, same logic, rewritten in my hand. 20 years later, you tried to erase it again. There was no reaction, no questions, just cold silence. Tariq didn't blink. He flipped to the third page, side-by-side comparisons of his napkin theory and Russell's plagiarized version. Every line annotated, every date time-stamped. You gave credit to a white graduate student who couldn't explain half of this framework on his own. You lifted a theory born out of a black legacy and gave it a new name. A projector lit up behind him as Keisha, seated in the audience, activated the visual feed. The screen displayed email chains from Gatekeeper, memos, surveillance stills, then audio clips, Whitaker's voice. He's too risky. Russell is presentable. We can't let this spiral define the institution. Tariq turned slowly. You didn't just reject an idea. You targeted a lineage. You dismantled a family's intellectual history because you were afraid of what it would mean if our minds were undeniable. A murmur ran through the room. Some board members exchanged glances. Others stared forward, unmoved. Tariq continued, each word sharper than the last. You threatened my scholarship. You discredited my name. You erased my father's work, then punished me for resurrecting it. And when the truth began to surface, you tried to discredit me. He paused, steeled himself. I came here for a degree. You gave me a war, and I didn't fight it with protests. I fought it with math, with logic, with truth. He placed a final sheet on the table, an open letter signed by over 120 professors, researchers, and deans from institutions across the country. It demanded the immediate reinstatement and public recognition of Malcolm Ellis's theory. Formal credit and publication rights returned to Tariq Ellis, a public apology, and reformation of internal academic oversight protocols. Tariq stepped back, letting the silence hang heavy. Dean Holloway finally spoke, her voice brittle. We acknowledge the concerns raised here today. The board will now go into closed deliberation. The lights dimmed slightly as Tariq walked out, passing rows of students, faculty, reporters. Some nodded. Others sat in stunned quiet. The collective waited outside. Elena held up her phone. You're trending again. They're calling you the mathematician who refused to disappear. Tariq didn't smile. He sat on the steps outside the administration building, binder on his lap, staring up at the carved name above the door, Founders Hall. Founders. They named buildings after the people who built institutions, but never after the ones they tried to bury beneath them. The deliberation took over an hour. When the doors finally opened, the board filed out without making eye contact. Dean Holloway stepped to the podium. Cameras clicked. Reporters leaned in. She cleared her throat. The board has reached its decision. She paused, her lips pressed tight. Then she said, We regret to inform you. We regret to inform you. The words from Dean Holloway hung like smoke in the cold morning air. But what followed shocked everyone. That the university cannot, in good conscience, continue to deny the intellectual contributions of Tariq Ellis, or the legacy of his father, Malcolm Ellis. We issue our formal recognition of the Ellis spiral theory and acknowledge our role in suppressing its origin. Gasps spread through the crowd. Tariq didn't move. He didn't even blink. Dean Holloway continued, reading from a prepared statement, but her tone was heavier now, as though every word tasted bitter. The board has unanimously voted to rescind all previously awarded credit tied to the Palmer-Russell recursive model. The original theoretical framework will be attributed solely to Tariq Ellis, based on the overwhelming evidence of authorship, timestamps, and academic review. A thunderous cheer erupted behind him. Flashbulbs flickered. Cameras zoomed in. But Tariq stood still, hands folded in front of him, his eyes locked on Holloway. She wasn't finished. Professor Whitaker has submitted his resignation. Effective immediately, an investigation will follow to determine further breaches of ethics. That part sounded sanitized, rehearsed, an escape route disguised as accountability. Still, it was more than anyone expected. Dean Holloway cleared her throat. Additionally, the university will be launching a new program, the Ellis Initiative, a scholarship and research fund dedicated to elevating underrepresented voices in STEM. We will also be initiating an independent audit of internal oversight procedures, including the dissolution of any gatekeeper-related programs or affiliations. More applause. Tariq finally exhaled. After everything, the isolation, the humiliation, the threats, the silence, it wasn't just his theory that had been acknowledged. It was his existence. He stepped forward, facing the cameras for the first time, not as a target, not as a cautionary tale, but as something far more dangerous to systems built on exclusion. Undeniable. A reporter shouted from the crowd, Tariq, how does it feel to be vindicated? He paused, then said calmly, Vindication doesn't erase damage, but it does expose who caused it. And that's where change starts. That night, news outlets ran headlines across the country, from janitor's son to mathematical pioneer. Braxton University concedes role in theory theft. The Ellis spiral, a legacy reclaimed. The MIT offer arrived the next morning. This time there was no pretense. No red ink scribble suggesting diversity quotas. It was signed by the chair of the mathematics department, who had seen Tariq's theory dissected in their own research journal. They wanted him as he was. The email included full funding, housing, and access to a mentorship lab named after another black pioneer in the field. At the bottom was a handwritten note from Dr. Kendra Lavoie. Your father's ghost is no longer buried. You brought him back through the work. Now let's take it further. Tariq stared at the screen for a long moment, then clicked accept. He didn't do it for revenge. He didn't do it for applause. He did it to prove that they couldn't hold back a mind determined to survive, even in silence. Later that week, Braxton organized a ceremonial acknowledgement. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was a beginning. The event took place in the math building's central auditorium, filled with students, faculty, media, and members of the collective. At the podium, Tariq stood beside a plaque etched with the Ellis spiral, an official recognition of both his and Malcolm's contributions. When the moderator handed him the microphone for closing remarks, he looked out at the crowd, most of them strangers, some who once laughed, others who stood with him when it mattered. He began simply, "This isn't about one equation. This is about erasure, about silence weaponized as policy, about what happens when institutions forget that brilliance doesn't come with a dress code or a pedigree." He held up a chalk-stained napkin. "This," he said, "was my first draft. Not on a whiteboard, not in a lab, in a cafeteria, alone, after being excluded from a study group." He paused, letting the memory settle like dust in the room. Because when you're invisible, you create in secret. And when your work threatens the system, the first thing they do is try to give it someone else's name. The crowd was silent, until he added, "But a name carries weight, especially when it's been buried before." Then, with calm precision, he made one final request. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't for vengeance. "I ask this institution, publicly, officially, and permanently, to rename this building, not after me, but after the man who taught me to carry chalk like a weapon, who solved equations by day and scrubbed floors by night, the one whose legacy you tried to erase twice." He turned toward the dean. "I ask that this campus's mathematics lab be renamed the Malcolm Ellis Center for Mathematical Resistance." For a moment, no one spoke. Then the room erupted. As Tariq stepped away from the podium, his phone buzzed. One message, from a blocked number. "This isn't over. The gatekeeper had chapters at 3 other universities. You just burned one." Years passed. Seasons changed. Presidents changed. Rankings changed. But one building on Braxton's campus remained still, reborn in purpose, if not in architecture. The old mathematics wing, once faceless brick in forgettable halls, now bore a name carved in deep stone. The Malcolm Ellis Center for Mathematical Resistance. Students walked past it every day, some pausing to read the etched dedication at its front entrance. Others whispered stories, some true, some mythologized, about the janitor who once solved unsolvable problems in silence, and the son who returned with a theory that shook the system from the inside out. Inside, everything had changed. Not the walls, not the aging pipes that still hissed in winter, but the air, the energy. Room 2014, formerly Whitaker's lecture hall, had been converted into an open studio for exploratory math. Gone were the rigid seating rows and podiums of authority. Now the chairs circled the chalkboard. The tables were mismatched, covered in chalk dust, notes and half-finished proofs. At the center of it all stood Professor Tariq Ellis. No title plate, no doctoral arrogance. Just a man with a chalk-stained sleeve and a heart that carried equations like family heirlooms. He didn't lecture. He asked questions.
He didn't assign theorems.
He offered mirrors. Students, especially black students, saw something here they never saw before, themselves without compromise. Each semester on the first day of class, Tariq told the same story, not from behind a desk, but standing beside the same chalkboard that had once been weaponized against him. He pointed to the framed equation that now hung in glass. "This was once a trap," he'd say. "A problem I wasn't meant to solve. Not because it was too hard, but because I was too black to be seen solving it." He'd pause, then smile. "Turns out I didn't just solve the problem. I rewrote it." And every student, regardless of background, leaned in just a little closer. Today was no different. Outside, the wind whipped against the windows, carrying autumn leaves across the quad. Inside, the room was full quiet, but alive. Tariq stood by the board, arms crossed. He'd just finished walking the class through the recursive patterns of the Ellis spiral, now included in multiple graduate syllabi around the world. But his eyes weren't on the theory. They were on the boy in the third row. He was black, young, freshman, named Malik Johnson. He rarely spoke, wore the same hoodie every week, avoided eye contact, but his notes were always precise, pages of elegant loops, margins filled with silent ideas. Tariq saw himself, and today he was going to do what no one did for him. He set the chalk down gently. "Malik," he said softly but clearly, "would you be willing to come to the board?" Malik froze. A few students glanced his way. Tariq didn't pressure. He just smiled. "I saw what you wrote on last week's quiz. Your approach to the loopback function, it wasn't just accurate, it was new. I'd like you to walk us through it." Slowly, Malik stood. He walked like the floor might give way beneath him. Tariq stepped aside, handed him the chalk. Malik faced the board, stared. The air felt thick again, like it did for Tariq once. All those years ago, the weight of a room, the silence, the judgment that hides behind politeness. The feeling of being watched, not as a thinker, but as an anomaly. But then something happened. Malik raised the chalk. He drew a line, then a curve, then a notation no one expected. Murmurs rippled through the room. Tariq smiled, because he knew this language. He'd written in it once on a cafeteria napkin, when no one believed he belonged. And now, this boy, this quiet, brilliant boy, was speaking it fluently. Malik explained the loop structure, slowly, his voice gaining strength. Tariq stepped back, watching with quiet pride. No interruptions, no corrections, just space. At the end, Malik turned, nervous. Tariq nodded. That, he said, is how revolutions begin. The class applauded, not performatively, but sincerely. Malik sat down, eyes wide. The moment passed quietly, but something permanent had just been etched into the culture of the room. Later that day, Tariq walked the hallways alone. He paused by the framed photo near the entrance. Malcolm Ellis, holding a mop and a math book. Beneath it, a plaque read, "In memory of those who solved in silence." Tariq placed his hand on the glass for a moment. A silent thank you, not just to his father, but to every student who ever sat in a classroom and wondered if their ideas would survive the system designed to mute them. He walked back toward his office, but not before glancing at room 214 one more time. The chalkboard was still full of Malik's work. Symbols, loops, and at the very bottom, one small equation that hadn't been there before. It was incomplete, but promising. Like something waiting to evolve. Tariq smiled. Because that's how math worked. And that's how movements did too. The camera lingers on the chalkboard as the last student exits. A janitor enters. Older, black, humming softly as he sweeps the floor. He pauses, looks at the board, and whispers, "Looks like he's got it." And on the desk, a folded napkin, marked with 3 slashes and a dot. No student should have to choose between dignity and opportunity. No father should see his child in cuffs for fitting a description. If you believe stories like this deserve to be seen, not buried, type yes. If you believe in justice, subscribe if this broke your heart.